So I cover the Hollywood strikes quite a lot on this channel. Probably about half of my videos are either covering the strike and the other half are reviewing stuff. And you'll notice that I am constantly referring to the AMPTP, which is the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. They are a group of the largest studios in Hollywood, all joined together to negotiate with the unions as a block. It's basically like a union, but for the big companies to represent their interests rather than the workers' interests. So I mention them quite a bit on the stream, but not a lot of people really know who or what they are. And there was a article that came to my attention this week while I was doing research for topics, and it looks like it is a rather in-depth article covering the AMPTP. It says, Unmasking the AMPTP, Hollywood Labor's Opaque Nemesis. So I thought, I have not actually read all of this, but I thought it would be interesting to go in and it'll be a bit of a research stream / later video. Let's go ahead and dig in and find out more about what they are. Bennifer the Potato, welcome to chat, says, unions for everyone except cops and corporations. Yeah, I think I agree there. Okay, so during the double strike, a studio bargaining coalition run by lawyers and located in a suburban shopping mall has been portrayed by the unions as a James Bond villain set on breaking their solidarity. The Hollywood Reporter peeks behind the curtain. Now, I should point out that while this is an article trying to go into the inner workings of the AMPTP, that this is a Hollywood Reporter article, and the Hollywood Reporter, as well as Deadline and Variety, are all owned by Penske Media, which also owns Dick Clark Productions, which is a member of the AMPTP. So while individual reporters aren't necessarily going to have a bias toward or against the AMPTP, there's always going to be editorial decisions made in what stories get covered and who gets favorable coverage and who doesn't get favorable coverage. I gather from just the tone of the headline here that this isn't necessarily going to be favorable to the AMPTP, but that is something that I always need to take notice of, because a lot of the stories that I get are from those big three newspapers, because they are the big entertainment industry newspapers. They're based in Hollywood. They're the ones going out and they know people. They talk to people. So a lot of the information comes through here, but you always have to keep in mind that because they're all owned by the same parent company, there are financial incentives in play. But let's get into it. On September 8th, more than 4 months into a historic Hollywood labor battle, the Writers Guild of America turned a Klieg light on its adversary, the Alliance of Motion Picture and Television Producers. Citing behind-the-scenes conversations the union's leaders were allegedly having with unidentified legacy studio executives, its negotiating committee said in a bulletin to its members that the standstill is the result of the trade association's own paralysis, pointing to the AMPTP's disparate business models and interests, as well as different histories and relationships with unions. The WGA, calling for direct negotiations with individual companies, added that the legacy studios are more amenable to its proposals than other companies, but are hamstrung by the hardliners in their caucus. The labor group's subtext: it's looking to dismantle its nemesis. In response, the AMPTP insisted its constituent companies are aligned, and any suggestion to the contrary is false. Still, multiple studio insiders say that in recent weeks, Ted Sarandos, frustrated by a lack of progress in negotiations, has grumbled about Netflix leaving the AMPTP to pursue its own deal, though they add that this inclination has seemingly passed. Netflix declines to comment. And also, I should point out that as of this afternoon, Ted Sarandos was in talks with the WGA as part of the AMPTP. Typically a humdrum and ignored epicenter of contract lawyering situated in a suburban shopping mall, the AMPTP has lately taken on a spectre-like aura among union members, its president Carol Lombardini emerging as the starring Bond villain of Hollywood's dual strike saga. SAG-AFTRA walked in July when its own demands weren't met. The little is known or understood of the AMPTP and its Byzantine operations, not just by those outside the business, but even by those long employed within it, adds to the frustration and intrigue that swirl around the alliance. 8 companies constitute the organization's Class A members that, along with top AMPTP staffers, call the shots during negotiations. Disney, NBC Universal, Paramount, Sony, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, and Warner Bros. Discovery. Amazon and Apple, those are big companies, but not for the entertainment industry. I mean, they have been able to leverage their gigantic I mean, Amazon and Apple are like the two largest companies on the planet, right? So they've definitely been able to leverage that total economic power into the entertainment industry. But it is interesting to see that all of these other companies, well, Sony, I guess, does basically everything, but still, Sony has had a media presence for a long time. Amazon and Apple are kind of newcomers to the scene. It's interesting to see everyone else is like, yes, those have all been making movies and TV shows forever, and then Amazon and Apple. It's one of the most, if not the most powerful multi-employer associations in the world, says a union negotiating committee member. Didn't Amazon buy Love Film, which was how they broke in? I don't know. I don't know what Love Film is. But Amazon has always grown either by undercutting its competition or buying its competition, so that wouldn't surprise me. As the dual strikes drag on, questions are emerging about the association, its composition, and its efficacy. The AMPTP definitely has a very valuable place in our industry and in collective bargaining negotiations because of the decades of knowledge of experience, says Loeb & Loeb Entertainment Labor Chair Ivy Kagan-Bierman, who turns to the organization's extensive records of past negotiations and arbitration decisions for her work. There's strength in solidarity. At the same time, I think that many people are taking a fresh look at this in light of the fact that we're now at a place in our industry where these deals are not getting done, and we have dual strikes going on longer than I think all of us would have hoped. The AMPTP declines to comment for this story. Well, that's interesting. Declined to comment when the company that's talking to you is part of you. In early 2008, during the middle of the previous WGA strike, the AMPTP and its sister organization, the Motion Picture Association, sublet more than 100,000 square feet of office space from Warner Brothers at the Sherman Oaks Galleria, a mall also inhabited by the Cheesecake Factory and P.F. Chang's. Their office space is at a mall. That's funny. This discreet presence, not even a logo is displayed, belies the AMPTP's key role in the industry as it negotiates 58 ongoing contracts on behalf of hundreds of production companies. I'm sorry, it's just the Cheesecake Factory and P.F. Chang's. I'm just imagining all of these negotiations going on at like the Cheesecake Factory. Like, oh yeah, no, let's just step outside the office and grab some P.F. Chang's. We're good. Maybe they're really lucky and there is going to be a rainforest cafe, you know, for the ambiance. You gotta have your animatronic jungle animals, you know? The association has existed in different forms and under a variety of unwieldy names for nearly a century, but its prime mandate has remained labor contract negotiation. In 1982, two separate industry bargaining representatives merged and the current iteration of the AMPTP was born. Management felt that unification would strengthen its hand, thereby making strikes less likely in the future, explained Lombardini's predecessor, former AMPTP president Nick Counter, in a conference paper. Previously, unions had been able to play the two industry groups off each other, he argued, which proved to be a successful bargaining strategy. Yeah, that definitely seems like something they'd like to return to, as it said earlier, where Ted Sarandos was grumbling about the negotiations and was possibly thinking to leave. The past few years have once again reshaped the alliance as the entertainment production subsidiaries of tech companies Amazon and Apple have joined, as well as streamer Netflix, which entered the fold in 2021. The AMPTP board, populated by representatives from its top companies, has voted in these companies as Class A members, explains a management side source with knowledge of the group, a sign of respect and potentially also fear. When the AMPTP board decides whether to admit another studio as a member, the calculus is this studio a significant enough player that they could potentially prejudice our interests by negotiating separately, as opposed to being in the tent with us, says this insider. Netflix would definitely be one of those concerns for them. These new members and their inherent tensions with the traditional studio participants, who are their fierce competitors, have led some prominent industry voices, including IAC chairman and former Paramount and Fox leader Barry Diller, to suggest that certain legacy studio AMPTP member companies strike their own deals with the unions. When Diller ran Paramount decades ago, he and then Universal chief Lou Wasserman both pulled out of the AMPTP. Judging by the WGA Negotiating Committee's September missive to members, the writers would again welcome such a fracture. The WGA's current position is that the AMPTP engages in what U.S. labor law considers coordinated bargaining, where members can leave the coalition at any point, and also that the union is within its rights to negotiate with individual entertainment companies. The AMPTP enjoys perennial home court advantage during contract talks with unions by offering substantial dedicated space for marathon negotiating sessions. Dozens of representatives, lawyers, executives, note takers, and others can be present for each side in the primary room where bargaining occurs, even as the number varies according to the contract under negotiation. The recent SAG-AFTRA negotiations saw upwards of 50 people representing the union, with less in attendance on behalf of the AMPTP and others signing in on Zoom. The sides face each other across the table with their leaders at the center. Major companies' representatives are in front alongside Lombardini and her number 2 AMPTP Senior VP Business Affairs Tracy Cahill, with secondary and tertiary participants seated behind. For some reason, just the details of who's sitting where and who's in the room. I'm going to be a bit of a theater nerd here, but I'm just thinking I want to be in the room where it happens, the room where it happens, the room where it happens. The union's lead negotiators and their top lieutenants, meanwhile, sit across from their studio counterparts in the center with a similar tiered arrangement behind them, except that the labor side's third row consists of single-occupancy school-style desks rather than a long table per several sources. This discrepancy irks some on the labor side of these negotiations. It feels very infantilizing, says SAG-AFTRA negotiating committee member Sean Sharma. Yeah, sitting in a school desk. Okay, is it a half desk or do you get a drawer? Is it only enough that you can like write on a piece of paper, or can you hide snacks in there? That's what I want to know. The WGA and SAG-AFTRA instructs their negotiating teams not to show emotion in the room, which could give away or miscommunicate what the union's reception may be to various statements or proposals. It's like the Roman Forum. It's built for intimidation and it's effective, says another union insider of the room, who notes that management meets among themselves in the space while labor assembles in another part of the building. So every time you negotiate, you come into their room. Recording is not allowed inside, so each side takes its own notes, both for present purposes and because they can be helpful in any potential future arbitrations, where records of what each side meant and understood about various agreements at the time are key. Lombardini herself is said to be a prolific note-taker during negotiations. And this is Carol Lombardini right here. Typically, the negotiations begin with both management and labor exchanging proposal packages, followed by negotiators explaining each point to the other side in the main auditorium-like chamber. The parties then confer among themselves in what is referred to as a caucus to determine potential edits, rejections, and counteroffers to the various proposals. One entertainment union sweeps the caucus spaces provided for their internal deliberations for bugs, while another group brought white noise machines to make their negotiating team feel more comfortable. Explains one union negotiator, "We take what they want, we discuss it in the room. Can we work around this, or is this impossible? Can we bundle this because there's other stuff we want? Maybe we can bundle a little bit of their stuff and a little bit of our stuff to move us forward." Sometimes issues get referred to a committee where a smaller group of AMPTP and union officials attempts to work out a compromise on specialized points. When the two parties want to discuss a topic in a smaller setting, sometimes when they're getting closer to a tentative agreement on particular proposals, they engage in a so-called sidebar where only the chief negotiators on each side and perhaps a few others meet to hash out the issues. Sometimes sidebars are on the record, meaning they can be enshrined in the bargaining history of the negotiations, whereas most are off-the-record conversations that go into both sides' notes, but will not be officially memorialized. The overall tone of the negotiations tends to be lawyerly, dry, and cordial, though sometimes discussions can get heated according to participants. There definitely are times when tempers flare, says the union negotiator. At the management side, meanwhile, sometimes feels that top labor negotiators are simply performing for the negotiating committees and members. As chief negotiator for the AMPTP, Lombardini's job is, in part, to listen to the objectives on both sides and propose solutions that will persuade union leaders to recommend an agreement to their members and get it ratified, as well as satisfy corporate on the management side. After all, the AMPTP negotiates not only with union leaders, but itself. The company's respective heads of labor relations must find consensus among themselves on often evolving proposals and counteroffers, and sell them to their own C-suites, each of which evaluates the potential deals based on different corporate goals. CEOs typically sign off on the AMPTP's bargaining goals before negotiation, says a management side source with knowledge of the AMPTP, giving company labor relations executives direction and a certain degree of latitude in talks. Primarily, it's shuttle diplomacy, with individual company labor representatives speaking to their own individual CEOs, and then coming back into the AMPTP room armed with the level of authority that they have, the source adds. But when it comes to major decisions on how to break an impasse like those in the current WGA and SAG-AFTRA negotiations, companies' top leaders tend to get involved, hence the much chattered about recent CEO-only conclaves. Yeah, I've heard about those. Hopefully, a lot of that was very dry stuff. Hopefully we're going to get to something a little bit more meaty, but here we go. Lombardini, an AMPTP lifer who joined the organization when it began in '82 and spent years as its second-in-command before ascending to the presidency in 2009, is known to be politic in her approach. Though she speaks to company CEOs as needed, she spends most of her time with this group of labor relations executives, navigating their various mandates and attempting to keep the group united. Meanwhile, in her dealings with the unions, Lombardini is known for her school teacher demeanor, a stickler for correct grammar and punctuation whose drawn eye rolls for prompting her labor counterparts to recite Good Morning Carol. Oh my god. She has set up the negotiating room to put all of the union representatives in classroom desks and say good morning, Carol, every time they meet. That is psychotic. Oh my god. If this is your school teacher, fucking run. Carol has this horrible job whipping everyone into shape and finding common ground, explains ABC's longtime labor chief, Jeff Ruthizer. Ruthizer? I like Ruthizer because I like the idea that he's got like a little ray gun that turns people into Ruth. You've been Ruthized. Who retired in 2009 and last year published Labor Pains, a memoir of decades of union wrangling. He adds of his former colleagues, these people in the room represent the views of their leaders. They aren't operating on their own, but with the sanction of CEOs. It's very stressful. Adds another management side investor. You've got a whole bunch of companies that have different interests that are trying to put a unified case forward. But that's the miracle of Carol Lombardini, that she's able to do that because they don't all have the same interests. Miracle or not, for this task, she is compensated with an annual salary of more than $3.1 million. According to the nonprofit's most recent available IRS filing. By comparison, the highest paid across the table, the Hollywood labor leader, SAG-AFTRA National Executive Director Duncan Crabtree Ireland, made $772,000 in the same year. Oh my god. Yeah, that makes sense. The money is on the studio's side. Jesus. $3 million a year. And she's not doing a very great job this year because they've been on strike for half of it. Her current husband is a seasoned employment attorney, a partner emeritus at Mitchell, Silberberg, and Knupp. He has himself represented studios in industry-wide arbitrations with labor groups as well as in class action, wage, and age discrimination cases. MSK, where Lombardini's deputy Cahill and her predecessor Counter also previously worked, has represented AMPTP for decades. During its talks with the AMPTP this year, the Writers Guild has referred to the organization's so-called playbook of tactics during negotiations. When pressed on what that strategy generally looks like, union sources say it involves trying to maintain the status quo or finding cost-cutting efficiencies in their deal, as well as trying to divide the various entertainment unions and even pitting factions within their memberships against one another. And we've seen bits of that. Like, Variety has run several stories in which anonymous, showrunners, that's one of the things that they've been going for, is because the studios really hate the writer room size mandate. And so what they've done is they've gone and found showrunners who won't give their names on the record, but will speak under condition of anonymity, saying, oh no, I don't want people to tell me how many writers I'm supposed to have on my staff. What if I just want to do it myself? Or what if I just have a very select team? But they never were willing to go on the record, and it's always I think they got at most 7 showrunners to talk to. It's in Hollywood, so there's a lot of showrunners. So getting gripes from a couple, that definitely, when I read that article, and I'm pretty sure that was in a video I released a couple weeks ago, that definitely seems to me to be Variety working as an arm of the AMPTP to do just this. Adds a labor side source close to the WGA negotiations. In typical pattern bargaining, a union chooses the employer that it thinks it can get the best deal with, which it patterns to the rest of the employers. That is turned on its head in this industry. In June, the AMPTP struck a deal with the DGA, historically Hollywood's most management amenable. Its contract terms have drawn public as well as private criticism among fellow entertainment unionists who believe it undercuts their own efforts. Yeah, the DGA took their deal this year. And it wasn't a great deal, but directors tend to get paid more anyway, and directors tend to work more closely with the producers. Directors themselves are kind of in a managerial class, so even though it is a lot of work, they're still basically running the show. So the DGA is generally not seen as a reliable union for SAG and WGA when they're looking for solidarity in that regard. One management side source disagrees that there even is a playbook, contending that there's no such thing because there's just too many different voices in the room. A difficulty compounded by the fact that the AMPTP is said to operate on basis of unanimity. Why I am blanking on how to pronounce that word. If I had looked at it 5 minutes ago, it would have been fine. Unanimity. Making sure all top member companies agree on significant decisions. Sources on both sides do agree, however, that the member companies have in the past emphasized economic headwinds during negotiations to achieve their goals. If the AMPTP does have a classic playbook for negotiations, 2023 is pushing that strategy to its limit, presenting the organization with an ongoing double work stoppage not seen in more than 6 decades. Talks sputtering and restarting, possibly next week. Oh yeah, this came out last week, so the talks are going on right now with the WGA. And the consequences snowballing, from industry members taking on second jobs and queuing up at food drives to the fall television season in shambles. Even after the current strikes are resolved, multiple sources suggest the AMPTP may undergo significant changes. Thence, one high-level management side source with knowledge of the current state of play: companies have to push Carol out of her comfort zone. Carol works from an old-fashioned playbook, and she thinks taking 3 weeks to respond is okay. She's never dealt with tech companies. Kagan Bierman, who is not in the room during AMPTP negotiations but represents a host of major companies in labor matters, says she's very concerned for the industry given the state of labor management relations and a breakdown in trust between the two sides. Her hope, she says, is that the parties rebuild confidence in one another and get to deals. But if we stay in this moment in our industry where there's a breakdown of trust and a breakdown of collaboration, I don't know how the AMPTP can negotiate these deals. That's where we are right now. Okay, so that was the article there. My takeaway from this is that it sounds like there's a big split in terms of ideology on how to handle these labor negotiations between the old guard and the tech companies that have recently come into the entertainment industry. And Carol Lombardini, just from what I've heard about her, that she treats negotiations like she's a school marm, making sure everyone is using the proper grammar and dotting their I's and crossing their T's and raising their hand before they speak, I'm sure. Yeah, I think the ultimate ideal would just be to see the dissolution of the AMPTP or seeing a significant fracture in it. I can't imagine after these strikes are resolved that the status quo is going to remain here, particularly because SAG-AFTRA has been making deals with independent studios to continue filming, even to allow people to promote their stuff, like I covered in my other segment here. But Iron Claw has secured a SAG-AFTRA interim agreement that allows the stars to promote the movie since it is being released by A24, who has agreed to SAG's proposal. Yeah, so seeing more studios being willing to negotiate directly with the WGA rather than signing on to the AMPTP, they're certainly going to be making money by being allowed to do their jobs, by being allowed to produce things. Meanwhile, everyone signed on to the AMPTP. Well, they haven't been able to get anything done in months. So I don't think they're doing a very good job here just in terms of protecting their own interests. But when I say the AMPTP in my videos, this is who they are. So I've learned something here. Hopefully so have you. This was an article by The Hollywood Reporter written by Gary Baum and Katie Kilkenny, and I think down here it said Kim Masters contributed to this report. So I will be linking this article in the description on the video itself, since I read the whole thing and it was a deep dive into it myself. But now you know, and knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like and subscribe and ring the bell. I stream every Monday and Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific, so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons with a special shout out to Piftle Cakes and Ryan D. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.